because back then it was very frame by frame, and really people don't even realize, that era existed. And we saw, it was the same at ILM. Like, this was all happening, the visual effects studio, at the same time, where remember there was this era in video games, Wing Commander.
Oh yeah.
There was a bunch of others. And now we have new personas in Web3. We have speculators and holders, and they have different agendas, and they all should be part of this. I've always said that. And, sometimes it's hard to predict the timeline of these things. That's one thing I've learned. You can be too early, but we got into AR, for example, very early.
Hello everyone, this is Duke from Fungies.io. I'm super excited today to talk with Michael Levine from Planet Mojo. Michael, could you introduce yourself to our audience today?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. First of all, Duke, great to talk. My name is Mike Levine from Mystic Moose is the company, and you can probably tell Mojo Melee is our game, and Planet Mojo is this world we're building. And yeah, I think we'll get into my background. I saw your questions, so I can save for that. But yeah, I've been making games for a long time.
Yeah, so I have seen you started out with LucasArts or Lucasfilms. It is, such an honor to talk with a person who had initial careers at such a studio. Can you tell me more about how it began, all your game development, your senior effect artist back then, right? How did it start?
Sure.
How did it affect your game development career?
Well, back when I started, there wasn't video game courses in college. It was really not even a career track that I considered growing up. But I loved playing video games growing up, and played them when I was young in my house, Atari and television. Went to college, played a lot of Nintendo and consoles and sports games with my friends, and moved out to California. I thought I was going to go to grad school at UC Berkeley, and I needed to become a resident of California. So I needed a job for a year. And lucky me, I saw a job in the paper, Lucasfilm Games, I can't remember. I have it somewhere. It said testers or QA one. It probably said testers. I don't think I knew what QA was. But I went in for an interview and they hired me, and I really didn't even know what I was getting into. I started in QA, which I always tell people is to this day, it's a great place to start if you want to get into games and learn the industry, because everything kind of collides at QA. And at Lucas, there was a room where all the testers were in. It was called the test pit. It smelled a lot. It was dark, but everyone came in there. The programmers, the sound guys, the cinematic guys, the designers. And so you got to learn how games were put together. But short story is, so yeah, even though I was loving it there and felt like I could fit in or whatever, I didn't give up on that other dream immediately. And so I was working at Lucas, and then I started this internship in San Francisco in the city, more of a video place, nonprofit arts, but this was the beginning of digital video and really just digital media. And so I started learning about Photoshop and After Effects and Premiere and nonlinear editing. And I asked the art director if I could use the computers to play with Photoshop. And I think it took about 2 days before she was like, "Oh, you know Photoshop?" I was like, "Well, I'm kind of still learning it." And then I kind of got moved over to the art department and then started working on games there. And it was just kind of a progression of the more I learned about the current processes, I was kind of able to apply the stuff I was learning on the outside into future games and speed things up a lot, because back then it was very frame by frame, and really people don't even realize that era existed. And we saw it was the same at ILM. Like, this was all happening, the visual effects studio, at the same time, where they were going from Roger Rabbit, frame at a time, hand painting cells. We would go over and see demos of how they did that. And some people who worked on it worked with us, and just suddenly, you could, something that took a week, you could do in a day. And so that helped my career because I was the guy who knew it, and they were all smarter than me. But when you're at a small company, everyone's heads down, and so they didn't know what was going on in the outside world. And I was kind of the guy, hey, and I was absorbing so much back then, and we were collaborating with ILM, and yeah, it was just a magical time to work with so many smart people at Lucas. And some of them work for Mystic Moose today, and I'm still in touch with a lot of those guys. I mean, yeah, we can go over all the other things I've done, but just a few years ago, we did a Sam and Max VR game, which was a classic game. The first full game I worked on at LucasArts, and we had the opportunity to turn into a VR game, and it brought together a lot of those old friends from LucasArts, and it was just a lot of fun to make.
Yeah. So, what games did you make at that time? You were QA. Did you actually join any game development team? And
Yeah.
Did you get to meet George Lucas?
The last part I did. The joke was, I think I was at LucasArts 7 years, and he came down to visit 4 times, maybe. 2 of those were when we had like new presidents to announce it, but the other 2 were to see what me and my group were working on, our team, because it involved video, and he was very interested in that. I'm kind of jumping around, but remember, there was this era in video games, Wing Commander.
Oh yeah.
There was a bunch of others. Graham Devine made the first one. I'm blanking on the name. It was like a haunted house, but yeah, and there was Spaceship Warlock. There were other ones. So Lucas wanted to get in on that action, and we did some. I just did a whole interview on this actually, where a real LucasArts aficionado, and he had only heard rumors of this because it was never released. But it was this whole Indiana Jones production we did. I mean, really, all those tests ended up being in games like Rebel Assault 2 and Jedi Knight, Dark Forces 2, which had like 40 minutes of cutscenes, which me and my group were in charge of, and we shot in LA. But yeah, when I started in testing, we were testing Monkey Island 2. That was about to come out, and I was still testing Monkey Island 1 on older machines because they were always porting it to new platforms and localization, which always was drilled into me, things like the FM towns in Japan, and playing Monkey Island in kanji. But I worked on, so many games there. I mean, the early days, Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, which turns into X-Wing, which most people remember, an X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. But I tested X-Wing and used to go up to Larry Holland's place up in Fairfax because that was really developed externally. And that was incredible fun. And it was kind of right after that I moved to the art department, worked on some Super Nintendo maps for Super Nintendo, Star Wars, and those early games. But then I kind of quickly got put on to Sam and Max as the art tech, because my friend who had come from QA, who was the art tech, he wanted to be an animator. Thank God, because that gave me a big break. And he was like, I'm going to train you to do this. And I was like, okay. And I learned on the job. But yeah, I mean, the thing everyone always asked me what it was like to work on that. And it's such a blur. It's so long ago. But so for some reason, they put me next to Steve Purcell. Like, everyone was spread out back then. We didn't have like the team in one room. It was the art department and the engineering was in a different building. And I got to sit next to Steve Purcell for whatever reason. I think because I was the last stop, because I sort of took what the artist did, ripped it all apart, put it back together before I brought it to the programmers. So he wanted to see it, to make sure they didn't screw it up, maybe. I don't know. But like, yeah, he's just a very, very funny individual. And I just remember laughing the entire project. Somehow we got the work done, but it was, sometimes I had to put on my headphones because he made me laugh so much. But yeah, then those were the early days. Then, like I said, it kind of, once we did Star Wars games, it was all over, because those made a lot more money and they wanted more Star Wars games. So then it became, there were some other cool original games in there. I worked on like The Dig, which was a Steven Spielberg idea, and a bunch of others that we were always collaborating. Another Monkey Island, and yeah, then eventually a bunch of people were. It was sort of the beginning of this exodus of LucasArts after that, and we had finished our cutscenes early, and I had friends from ILM who were forming a new company, a startup, and I was pretty loyal. I thought maybe I'd worked there my whole life, whatever. It's kind of how I am, but I really liked the guy they were doing this startup with, and I'd been using his tech from ILM forever. Scott Squires, he's a legend in visual effects. So I did that for a couple years, but I miss games, and I wanted to get back to games. But the biggest thing I got out of that experience was one, being brave enough to do a startup and learning that life, and it let me move back to where I am now on the East Coast of Massachusetts in the U.S. and work remotely, which I guess is one of the many things I've been ahead of the curve on. But I had inspiration or examples at the time. I had worked on the movie since I knew people at ILM. I had the opportunity to work on a couple movies, and I worked on Spawn, this movie Spawn, if you remember that, and it was done by guys from ILM, same guys who did Jurassic Park, really, but they did it on their own, and ILM did the effects, but they worked with 50 effects studios across the entire planet. This is like the late 90s. These guys are sending tiny, super compressed MPEGs, over every day for their dailies, and they're making a feature film. And I'm like, if they can do that, make a feature film, I can probably make games remotely too. And so and there was a guy who lived back here, Doug Trumbull. He was another visual effects legend, and he left Hollywood years ago and started up shop out here. So it kind of just gave me the wherewithal, I guess, to be brave or dumb enough to do it.
So you were one of the first, I think, to see actually the blending of films, movies, and games back in the days. Nowadays, they make actually far better movies out of games than before. But still, I hope it's gonna be majority of good films like Mario Bros. Now and Sonic.
Yep.
But back in the days, what was the difference in game development, game making in the 90s and now? What do you see throughout all these years? What changed the most?
Well, I'll tell you what didn't change first. How about that? Which I think change is constant. That's one thing and maybe there are periods of where change gets more frenetic and then it kind of settle into a pattern. But I've learned over many years now, many decades, that just when you think things are okay, this is the way they are, no, there's always something new. There's always something exciting. I mean, back then, I think the main difference was you could make games. I mean, I feel like I can contradict anything I'm going to say, but in general, games were made with smaller teams, right? Now, we're still a pretty small team making a game, so that's why I hesitate to say this, but the big games, which is what we were making at Lucas, right? Those games are now 150, 200 people, those types of games. We made Dark Forces, Jedi Knight. That was probably 30, 40 people max, working on that, which is just crazy, to think about, really. So I think that's one thing, just as the art has gotten, as computers have gotten better, which has allowed the art to get better, depending on what kind of game you're making, right? Like, there's a lot more that can go into the art side, a lot more detail. But games are like everything now. So we still see new games that come out now that look like old games. I always joke because like a lot of us who worked at Lucas, and when there were very few pixels to spare and we were making 320, 200 games, when we see the retro games now, we're always we love them, but we also wince because it's like, oh God, that would, like, to us, that was so painful.
Yeah.
And they had to reduce the colors, like now you can make pixel games and there's less restrictions, and I've kind of come around and I do enjoy them now. But at first I was just like, oh God, why would you go back to this? And now that you can't fight the nostalgia.
Yeah, I've seen the original drawn with pencil and paper for the Pac-Man game. And it's amazing, and it's still in some museum in Tokyo in Japan. But that was hardcore, like making the everything on paper and pencil. So we have, I think, as an industry, have gone way ahead from those times. Speaking about jumping from period to period, you've set up also a virtual reality / augmented reality studio. How come AR and VR?
Well, the trend of me, I guess, or what I gravitate towards new tech. I'm a geek in that sense. So when new tech comes out, not all of it, but when one that interests me that I think also has mass market potential, that's going to change the world, I take notice. And sometimes it's hard to predict the timeline of these things. That's one thing I've learned. You can be too early, but we got into AR, for example, very early. We had made some mobile apps with that company, and the mobile space was just getting so crowded and really an ad spend war. I didn't want to do that. And I had a friend who worked at Magic Leap, which was the sort of precursor to the Apple Vision Pro. A friend I worked with at LucasArts, so throughout my whole career, it's always giving back. And he invited me to come to Florida. I got to see super early demos, like same ones George Lucas and Steven Spielberg saw, and they were apparently absolutely floored. I was kind of like, okay, this is kind of cool. But from a game development standpoint, it still had a ways to go, But I went back again in 6 months, and it was enough to make me realize this is going to be something someday. And we kind of dove into that, not even knowing Apple was going to add support for it, sort of just as we started working for it. And we ended up making a game with Phil Tippett, who worked on Star Wars and all those films and made the holochess scene. And we were also messing around with photogrammetry, which has sort of fallen by the wayside, but it was sort of a precursor to, volumetric capture and those kind of, it really is very similar. So we were scanning his handmade creatures and seeing them in 3D and animating them, and at the same time experimenting with AR. We're like, kind of like a Reese's peanut butter cup moment. We're like, what if we put these two together? And we're like, oh my God, this looks like holochess. And so, we had Apple's Game of the Day with it. It was fun. We brought it to HoloLens. This is sort of the first wave of AR. And really, we learned the downfalls of mobile AR, like sitting there holding it up forever for a board game was hard. We saw, though, how fun it was on a HoloLens, but was like, wow, when is it going to be till everyone has one of these? Like, how long is that going to take? And, we were in that space for over 5 years. We did many projects also with toy companies because they were very interested in it for a year or two, worked with Hasbro and Spin Master, and even did a spot for the Super Bowl one year that we made. And we worked with Niantic. That was kind of the sort of towards the end of that, and pushed it as far as we could with multiplayer. And it's really, it's kind of cool now that it's sort of coming back around, I think, with Apple Vision Pro. And I'm seeing a lot of ideas launching that, like, oh yeah, we did that, 5 years ago, or sort of did tests for it and hopefully inspired people. But ultimately, yeah, like AR, at least, like the Super Bowl thing we did is a good example. And we had to make a sort of decision as a company. And I'm just like, we're a games company. We like to make games. That's what's in our DNA. And the AR market was kind of shifting outside of Niantic, and even they have had a very hard time replicating it, right? Like, it more shifted to like advertising experiences like that, and within Snapchat, and using eighth wall, like these very 30-second like marketing experiences. And we were just like, that wasn't as fun to us. And so that's when we had the opportunity right before the pandemic really hit to do Sam & Max for the Quest. And we got a grant from Oculus, Meta, and and some others, and I mentioned it before, so I don't have to say, but it was fun making it. It came out, and it does well. Still does well to this day. It's great. But really, when we were making that game, I also realized, one, the limitations of the VR market, at least the size of it right now. Again, like, I still believe in all these things long term. Like, it's going to happen. But it was really then when I started hearing about NFTs and blockchain and what was going on there. And so, like, the last half of Sam and Max, or third, while I was waiting for the next build to test and put on my headset, I was researching blockchain and NFTs and starting to try to get my head around this world, which is, I've done many deep dives, all this tech I've mentioning and learning new things, but this was definitely by far the deepest rabbit hole. I'm still looking for the end of it.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of game developers that are scared of blockchain, scared of Web3, crypto in general. What can you tell them? Like, is it that scary? Like, what are the implications of blockchain and games?
Sure. I mean, first of all, like everything I was just saying, you can kind of tell that it would, and the team now, a lot of them have been with me throughout like the last decade. So it was in our DNA also not to be afraid of new technology and try new things. And like everything we were doing in AR was very new. Like we were, before Unity had support, and just trying to patch stuff together. So the team wasn't afraid to experiment and try new things. And I think when I explained blockchain to them, and we got in it pretty early, so there wasn't a lot of these, at least in North America, perceptions of it that we had now. And my team is open-minded, and I think I encourage them all to learn about it too. But to me and to us, it represented sort of a paradigm shift in gaming, where it extends a lot of things that we've seen in gaming growing, like communities. We didn't even talk about that when I worked at LucasArts, right? Even though we had one, right? It wasn't a word. But now, like, when you're launching a game, you have a community strategy, even if it's a Web 2 game. And Web 3 takes community to the next level. One of many things. I'm just using it as an example. But, like, because community is invested in the project, they're there from the beginning. They may own some of the assets through NFTs and a token. And so there's a much higher level of there's a much deeper relationship, with those players, and they help you early on form a community and test your game and give you feedback and ideas. And that's critical, to have that feedback loop. So that's been part of it to us. And also just the democratization of games, like giving people like us a chance to have alternative funding methods, and again, involving like community and token with that, because games really, Web 2 games, modern gaming business has, especially over the last couple years, has become very top heavy. The big players have even more control. And sure, there's an indie hit, one or two indie hits every year that break through, but you don't read about the thousands that don't. And those couple hits a year give people hope, but it's like getting a hit single on the radio. When I was a kid, it seems a lot easier than it is, right? So that blockchain really gives you freedom, right, and independence from that, and brings in a new audience that's has different interests, different personas, but add to a richer gaming ecosystem. And and then you have the whole decentralization side to it, of course, which this is something players need to, well, not need to, but I think will appreciate, I will say, over time. I spoke to a local high school here this week, and it was a lot about my career and video game industry. And so at the end, I was debating, do I want to mention blockchain and Web3 to them, and I asked them. I decided to, because I wanted to learn and see what they thought, and many of them hadn't even heard of it. They definitely didn't know the term Web3. I was like, blockchain, crypto, NFTs. Oh, then a few of them had heard of that, and I explained to them how we're using it, how we really have nothing to do with sort of that past NFT era of, the Beeple era, whatever, let's call it. Like, we're more, I explained to them through the lens of like being a gamer now, and how all these assets that they're paying for are really not theirs, right? They're on centralized servers, whether it's Blizzard or Riot or whoever it is. And if that company shuts down the game or goes away, that's it. And versus decentralized, where they own these outside of the game. They truly own them. Nobody can take it away from them if it's non-custodial. And just what that means, how many opportunities, interoperability. Yeah. So, and I definitely felt like they were very receptive. One kid even came up to me at the end and he was just like, I loved what you were saying about owning our assets in games, and that makes so much sense. And so that's what keeps me hopeful about this space. That like, even the same thing happened in free to play, right? Like, people don't remember, but there was a lot of pushback, and it took time, and it took a new generation of players who got phones and just like, okay, this is how it should be. And I think that's what's going to happen here.
Yeah, it is now by default free-to-play mobile games. That's one thing, nearly. So let's just now zoom in to one of the game's latest game, and Planet Mojo, obviously. How did you start with the idea for the game? It's an auto battle. Can you describe the game to the audience? How does the game work?
Sure. So, well, the inspiration, first of all, behind like Planet Mojo and our game, which is a auto chess battler called Mojo Melee, as you may be able to notice. First off, we saw a niche in the market just for games, auto chess battler games, where we wanted to make something that still had deep strategy but was accessible to a wide audience at the same time. And a lot of the other games that are out there, which we're big fans of, but they were more meant to be PC downloadable games. Matches can take 30 to 40 minutes, and we wanted to make something that was a little more digestible. Our matches are more 5 to 10 minutes, but still having that deep strategy, rank progression within it. And so we added a lot of new elements to the game as well that these games don't have, and that includes a deck building sort of collectible element, which plays a lot in line with the Web3 aspects, but just in the game in general really changes the strategy. And then we also have spell stones, which add this whole new element to these games. And yeah, if people haven't played an auto chess game, they probably have played one or a very similar type of game, and not even known it, right? Because you see auto battlers now in so many genres, but I think people asked me this the other day, like what is different about auto chess, which really only came out in 2019. I think it's a PvP game at its heart, right? You're playing against other people. It's competitive. We have sort of brackets in our 8-player. We have 2 modes in the game now. We plan to add more. But one is a one-on-one duel, and the other is 8-player melee. And both of them are like round robin. You have to win the best certain number of matches to progress to the next part. And that's what makes these games fun and competitive. And yeah, we've added a lot. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're about to add, which we've been working on.
Yeah, and there's a blockchain element to the game. Did you want it to be invisible? How did you approach to onboard Web 2 traditional players to the game?
Yeah, well, that's definitely been a big focus of ours and mindset. And we worked closely with Polygon and Animoca and others who have very similar mindsets and have supported us with this. And we were really lucky also to be one of the first Web3 game to work with Amazon Prime Gaming. And that kind of forced us to up our game a little bit. And when we did that, we formed a partnership with Horizon Blockchains and Sequence and put in their wallet to do exactly what you're talking about, make the onboarding as easy as possible for people who aren't used to it. But at the same time, this took a lot of thinking and questioning what we wanted to be and do, because there's a lot of solutions out there, and some of them are custodial and semi-custodial. We really wanted to remain true to having non-custodial wallets for people, EVM compatible. So that's what we did in as smooth a way as possible. But stepping back, like when you play our game for the first time, we don't force you to connect a wallet or even create one. It's Web 2 players will have no idea, honestly, that there's any blockchain in this game. And we did that to, one, ease the onboarding, but two, one, we didn't ever want to gate the game with NFTs. But we also feel like if you're going to introduce this to people, right, as opposed to just throwing it in their face immediately, make it more of a moment that they work towards, and a reward, an aha moment, something that they want to get. So this is something we're about to debut next week in our new season called Frozen Fates. It's just getting cold here. And people will now, we're putting in a whole new leveling system, which will have 5 new stages. But if people are when they hit level 20 with their mojos, and we'll add this soon to champions, but this is how it'll start, then they can mint them directly in the game. And it's one thing about us, I think, and we're not the only ones, but I do see a distinction, like in the Web3 space, of games who are sort of embedding it into their game, which is what we're doing, versus games who are like taking it completely out and putting it on a separate website and kind of hoping the players will go over there. I mean, we're both sort of obfuscating it a little bit. It's a sort of different ways of how we're doing it, but I think it's a distinction, because in our game, you're going to run into it, no matter what. You get this moment where you unlock a digital collectible, we call them, in the game, and then it's really an option for you if you want to mint them. We're sponsoring the gas. So in our game, for example, you don't buy any NFTs. You purchase in-app purchases, just like Web 2 players are used to as Web 2 digital assets. And then as you play with them and level them up, then you can convert them to digital collectibles and own them. And another reason we did that too, just thinking it through as best we can, because no one has a crystal ball, but we knew any game that tries to bring in that has a large number of players, if you're giving them everybody NFTs, those NFT collections are going to get very bloated very fast. and even through Amazon, we've seen that just on how many NFTs we've minted. But so we have gates to kind of slow that down in the game, and long-term plans to have sort of unique special collections for the collectors and speculator crowd.
So you spoke about in-game app purchases. So there was a hot time of play to earn, Axie Infinity, the era of like people going to the game, buying Axies and selling those Axies, and obviously selling for AXX token and making money. How about you guys? Have you thought, one, about making your own token? Two, how do you monetize the game? I know it's in-app purchases, but what were your assumptions at the beginning?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, first of all, yes, we've always planned on launching a token, and we're actually actively working on that now. So that is something that's coming soon, I can just say. And yeah, I mean, I guess I was, what I was describing just a minute ago is the Web 2 sort of financial aspects of it. On the Web 3 side, we have a lot of things we'll be putting in place. Right now, of course, like you described, just owning the assets, leveling them up, wanting to sell them in a marketplace. That's always been a part of this and will become more so. We're also about to unleash our, what we call the Mojo Maker, which is a on-chain avatar system. And we think it's the first of its kind. And so people can change their NFTs, if they're NFTs, their characters, and everything will ripple through on chain. And so the more of these assets and gear and costumes that we introduce, this is going to really create a whole economy around these things. And we've removed the rarity attribute from the new Mojos and these, because rarity really we feel should be by the it should be created by the players, not by us, right? And so our rarity is going to be more time limited things and events and getting all these different assets and skins, and then those can become valuable to players, who only have them. But then over time, of course, integrating the token into the game, which we'll be talking more about in the coming months, but having good sinks and faucets really is the key to this, and giving value to the players, to the token holders, and trying to not have it that economy destroy your game's economy, right? But I think the great thing that's happened, because we've been slow and patient with it, is there's now more games that have come out with token examples. Like before, we used to just have Axie. And I was like, okay, that doesn't work. Now what do we do? And now there's a bunch of games that have come out using tokens. And we worked out our token plan early on. We worked with a company called Republic and had a really great plan in those early days. And a lot of it's still relevant because they were very smart and gave us good advice. But we also are taking a moment to just look at the latest trends and make sure we are doing what we see working best, and that's sustainable long term. Our biggest fear is launching the token, and having it some impact on the game and long term of it. So yeah, I think it's really about, and that's what we're seeing, is sort of just treating, and this is true in free to play, it's really just an extension of it, because free to play, you treat players sort of with different personas based on their behavior. And now we have new personas in Web3. We have speculators and holders, and they have different agendas, and they all should be part of this. I've always said that. It's just a matter of making it all work together.
Yeah, you raised some financing for the game and for the studio. What can you tell about raising financing in equity versus publishing? And what can you tell those new game developers out there, studios who are just struggling to fundraise? What are the lessons to successfully close a round like yours?
I mean,
and how much was that?
We raised $5 million initially, then we raised several more million. Actually, we never really officially announced that, but in a private token sale. So it was kind of 2 rounds. Animoca was our lead investor, Courtside Ventures, but other great funds like Spartan and Collab and Currency, Spheremeon. Yeah, I mean, look, I could sit here and say I have all the answers, but I'm too honest to do that. I mean, one thing I've learned with venture capital and that whole world is they're very they're not necessarily I hope they're not listening. Hopefully not the most original thinkers, most of them, honestly. It is a pack mentality. And, when we raise money, Web3 games was the hot thing. And I think usually VCs with anything, they're going to make their bets in kind of wave 1, and then they're going to, something new comes along, AI. Or whatever they're going to get interested in. But in my talks with them, they still very much believe in this space. I think we're in this phase now. Well, one, we're coming, I hope, out of a phase the last year plus where venture capital raising money was, I've been told by many people, they've never seen it as bad as it's been, just in general, forgetting about the Web3 games part of it. And I think hopefully, we're starting to see that soften, especially with signs of bull returning, tokens doing well again on the VC side, on the Web3 venture side. That helps them a lot. But I think so that will help, I think, early startups. I really do think next year, people just getting into this, I think there'll be new capital coming into the market from other areas as well. Tokens are rising, FTX settlements, maybe things like that. And I think for the first wave of companies like us and others, I think like venture is really waiting to see, okay, you got some money, now prove it. Show us what you can do. And I've heard of some companies getting slight little slaps on the wrist for going back too soon. But you kind of, some companies don't have a choice. You have to. And we're still pretty well funded. We're going to be here for a while, and definitely have a chance to prove this out and show off a few more things. And that's what our goal's been, is in that sense, is really just to show that this game can be viable, and then think about raising more money.
So you talked about advertising in mobile games. Mobile games inherently through those years, I think they've become kind of like casino or chance games, where the main, let's say, avenue is just to make as much money from ads as possible, or sell as much in-game app purchases. What are your thoughts about making your game cross-platform on mobile? And will you ever spend money on advertising like other mobile game studios do, like with AppLovin, AppsFlyers, or through performance marketing? Will it actually work for Web3?
Sure. I mean, so there's a lot in there. Let me take the last part, and then you'll probably have to remind me of the first part. But yeah, we've already been doing UA tests. Normal Web 2, we're working with one of the best people in that field, running Android and now iOS tests in select countries. So, and because, like I said, our game is really designed to be at the front of it, at least, a normal Web 2 app, mobile, free-to-play game. So it's still incredibly important to see key KPIs in any game, I think, whether it's Web 2 or Web 3, things like retention and revenue and conversion numbers and funnels and things like that, because and then knowing who the users are, right? Like, okay, this kind of user, well, he's a holder and they behave this way, versus a Web 2 player plays this way. So analytics ties into this heavily, and we're seeing new firms. There was just an announcement this week that Spindle's partnering with AppsFlyer, to sort of blend Web 2, Web 3 analytics, and there's other firms doing that, I think, as well. So yeah, that's important. However, everyone knows that mobile's changed a lot in the last year and a half, and with IDFA and all that. So I've definitely been given advice about, and heard people saying that bigger companies are making overall sort of traditional UA less of the overall budget. So it's still a piece of the picture. What's that being supplemented with? Influencer marketing, TikTok, things like that on the Web 2 side. Web 3 is very important too, but it's a completely different mindset and how you talk to that audience versus Web 2. What was the first part of the question? I told you I'd forget.
I forgot it too.
Rewind.
No, rewind time. So the first part of the question was, does Web3 advertising, how is that different from Web2 advertising? And how do you attract players in Web3 versus traditional Web2 UA?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yes, this is the short answer. It's different. I mean, they're both multifaceted or have different buckets, I think. And what we've seen in Web3 is, one, just working with the influencer in the space, just like Web 2. It's very important, but it's a smaller space. But the other thing we've seen emerge is many different platforms helping to onboard users into Web3 through questing platforms. We work closely with Forge, who they were actually, I think, bringing in Web 2 and Web 3 players into the space. And there's Trophy, and there's others emerging that are sort of trying to be, through different incentive methods and all kinds of different things, really, in-game sort of Web 3 offer type platforms. And so it's using like the benefits of Web3 as an incentivization to bring in, Web3 interested players, I guess. So yeah, we're exploring all that, and really trying to just, like just like in Web2, when you're doing these kind of campaigns, you want to track them and you want to see what's the most successful. And then you sort of, after you do a lap around the track, like, okay, here's where we want to put more money into, because this is where we're driving the most users in. We've also brought our game again to Amazon, but we also brought it to Congregate and Addicting Games, just to bring in it's just a blue ocean of new players that are, they're in their community playing those kind of games. Oh, and I know what you asked me, cross-platform.
Yes.
This is so, yeah, we've been cross-platform really from the beginning. And the game is playable right now in the web browser, desktop web browser, play.planetmojo.io. And that's the game that you can play on our site there. You can play it on Congregate, Addicting Games, other places. But
Amazon Prime.
Yep. Well, Prime is more a link to it. Prime has a whole claiming system, and then you link back to the game. And but we've always known we were going to bring it to mobile. And that's, some people play it on PC and say, oh, you guys should make the matches longer or whatever. But I think, and it's amazing now that mobile's coming out and people are getting to play it, because we're hearing this, which I've been hoping we were going to for months, that once people play it on mobile, it kind of clicks, because it's like, okay, this feels like a mobile game now with the play pattern and the timing. And then they go back to PC and it's, we have total cross play, same accounts, same wallets attached. So, we have some more Web3 features on the website than are in the app, but over time, that'll be parallel. But if you, in terms of connecting wallets and things like that, MetaMask, but if you connect it on the website, we still read it in on the mobile side.
So we're running out of time. So last question, and you already talked about that AI in gaming. You've seen it all. You've seen mobile. You've seen consoles. You've seen AR, VR. You've seen Web3, blockchain. AI is coming to the game. What are your thoughts on this?
That could be my life story, from floppy disks to AI. Yeah, I mean, I think AI is still very new. I mean, I think with any of these new things, you hear this. There is a curve that people cite, sort of the excitement period. I can't remember what that's called, and then the trough of disillusionment. AI quite hasn't entered that yet, but it inevitably will. But it's going to change society in probably good and bad ways. We're already using it, for text and some art we do for marketing. But I think really to use it for game development, nobody knows yet. There's some little parlor tricks going on with letting people put textures on things and stuff. But I think we're going to see it play out, especially with like sort of chat GPT avatars, right? NPCs but what does that mean? Like, is that going to be, okay, now I can talk to him forever originally, but is it going to be more exciting and captivating and story driven than what a writer, had written for it? And maybe I'm old school, but I still believe like we're going to need humans to think of original ideas, like AI is sort of building upon what we did, right? So it's all familiar to us, but it's sort of what this is, how did new ideas emerge? When was the first time we saw something new that AI couldn't have even like comprehended? Now, I'm sure it will be able to do all this and more. So, but I just think for game dev, and like another friend I was talking to about it is like, he said this, and I think he's like, no one has really costed this out either, like on a business level. Okay, I'm going to make a game with all AI. Well, what's that cost? Versus humans. And we're going to learn all this over the next few years, and the tech is going to evolve probably faster than any of us can imagine. And so it's not something I would say we fully leaned into, but we're definitely keeping a close eye on. And I think everyone would be wise to.
Well, Michael, it was a super insightful talk. Thank you very much for appearing on my show. And
Thanks for having me.
well, see you guys until the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.